May 7th, 2017. Emmanuel Macron, 39 years old, is elected president of France. Young, charismatic, sophisticated, and his smile. Oh, that smile. There is just one small detail. Just 2 years earlier, almost no one knew who Emmanuel Macron was. It's March 12, 2015. A journalist from France.2 is out on the streets asking passersby if they recognize the man in the photo. Nope. I don't know. Is it someone from the government? Probably the Prime Minister. Not a single person guessed the man's identity, but just 2 years later, this man, Emmanuel Macron, would become president of France. A 39-year-old who had never held elected office, who only briefly served in government as an unremarkable and easy-to-forget minister of the economy, who had no well-established political party behind him, who seemed to appear out of thin air, with a personal background as marked and shady as his career in investment banking. How was it possible that such a man could rise to the highest office in the country, having been virtually unknown just a couple of years earlier? Who the hell is Emmanuel Macron? He was born in Amiens into a moderately wealthy family. His father, Jean-Michel Macron, was a neurologist. His mother, Françoise Hollande, was a psychiatrist known for participation in a committee that issued new documentation for trans people. That detail, unsurprisingly, fed into a few conspiracy theories surrounding our Monsieur le Président. But more on that later. For now, let's enjoy this beautiful family photo. Young Emmanuel with his loving parents. Why? Something's off? Well, here is a strange fact. There are no childhood photos of Emmanuel Macron with both his parents, which is odd. You know, it's easy to find family photos of young Donald Trump. Even childhood pictures of Vladimir Putin, notoriously private and secretive, are publicly available, same with Chairman Xi. But somehow, not for the president of a European country that proudly claims to be a transparent democracy. Macron's earliest confirmed photos date back to his time at Lycée La Providence, a private Catholic school in Amiens, run by Jesuits. Even by Catholic school standards, Emmanuel was a distant and private adolescent. His former classmates recall that he had no real friends, and that other students didn't even know what his parents did for a living. And then there is Brigitte Tourneux, his drama teacher, a woman who would later become his wife. She claims Emmanuel was irresistible, psychologically mature beyond his years, brimming with artistic potential, a young Mozart. But this story makes little sense. A quiet, solitary boy with no friends and highly private home life seduces 40-year-old married mother of 3 teacher?
Pareil à moi, l'épouvantail. La cannelle me porte jusqu'ici, dans le chariot de la fête.
Even his school performances from that time give off the impression of a lost and insecure child, not a charismatic alpha male prodigy, you know? Legally speaking, their relationship constitutes statutory. Even if Emmanuel was 15, that is the age of consent in France, Brigitte was his teacher. That means that she held authority over him, and in this case, age of consent rise to 18. Macron has tried to brush this off, saying something like, well, she wasn't a math teacher, she was a drama teacher, so it doesn't count.
Le président, il doit montrer l'exemple et ne pas se marier avec sa prof. Quand t'es amoureux, tu choisis pas? C'est pas bien, tu crois?
C'est pas facile.
Elle n'a pas été vraiment ma prof, elle était ma prof de théâtre.
Ah,
C'est pas tout ça compte pas pareil.
d'accord.
Le malin. Arrête. Mais arrête de me craquer mes trucs tout de suite. Donc, c'est vrai. Donc c'est pas, tu vois, c'est pas comme la prof de maths ou de...
I'm sorry, but that's a chilling explanation. especially given that young Macron looked less like a precocious seducer and more like someone who might have been groomed. But that's just my opinion. And you know what? I doubt his parents were thrilled about this relationship either. In 1995, they sent him to Paris to attend classe préparatoire at the prestigious Lycée Henri IV. You know, in France, universities are for immigrants and losers. Elite students aim for so-called école supérieure. And Macron had his sights set on ENS, École Normale Supérieure, arguably the top one school in France. But he failed the entrance exam twice, despite being hailed as a Mozart-level genius by Brigitte. Yet this failure might have actually worked in his favor. ENS leads to elite but mostly academic and philosophical careers. Instead, Macron enrolled in Sciences Po in 1998, a far more pragmatic choice. There he made his first major connection, philosopher Paul Ricoeur. Then in his late 80s, Ricoeur was working on his final book, La Mémoire, l'Histoire de l'Oubli. He brought Macron close and had him help edit the manuscript. Critics claim their collaboration is romanticized and overstated, but I think Macron's relationship with Brigitte, a woman 25 years older than him, taught him how to build relationship with older people, how to gain their trust, to navigate their egos and meet their expectations. His entire career would be built on relationships with powerful elders. Paul Ricoeur was just the first in the line. Macron's ability to build meaningful bonds with influential people secured him an internship in French embassy in Nigeria, where he was introduced to diplomatic circles. His next move was calculated. In 2002, he enrolled at ENA, École Nationale d'Administration, the factory for France's top bureaucrats. There he stood out by co-authoring a 20-page manifesto titled ENA, The Urgent Need for Reforms, signed by 132 out of 134 students. This caught the eye of Henri Herman. Herman, then in his 80s, was a businessman, media executive, and political advisor with deep ties to the Socialist Party. He became Macron's major benefactor, paying 500,000 euros for Macron's first apartment and even serving as a best man at his wedding. It's safe to say Herman smoothed Macron's way into general financial inspection in 2004 and helped him connect with key figures in the socialist network. Once he landed his first real job, Macron did what he does best. He got close to his boss, Jean-Pierre Jouyet. By 2005, Jouyet and Macron were reportedly close friends. Jouyet even described their relationship as lune de miel, a honeymoon. Wait, what? That's an eerie way to describe a professional relationship with your subordinates. He said they would drink whiskey together in his office and have long conversations after hours. Sure, maybe it was just a mutual love for whiskey. In 2007, Jouyet was appointed to a new government under Nicolas Sarkozy, the freshly elected president, promising large-scale national modernization. A special commission was formed to plan the needed reforms, and seemingly by coincidence, the head of this commission picked Emmanuel Macron as his deputy rapporteur. This man will be the key figure of the entire Macron's career. Ladies and gentlemen, the real-life Cardinal Richelieu, Jacques Attali. Jacques Attali came from a very wealthy family that made its fortune in the perfume industry in Algeria. His upbringing was steeped in elitism. Elite neighborhood, elite schools, elite friends, but unlike Macron, Attali was actually number one. He had no trouble entering École Polytechnique, the top STEM grande école in France, where he met future presidents, François Mitterrand. He later studied at Sciences Po, ENA, and Dauphine. By 1968, he had an elite portfolio of degrees and became Mitterrand's protege. In 1974, François Mitterrand asked him to run his presidential campaign. They lost. But neither Mitterrand nor Attali were easy to discourage. They built an opposition movement led by Attali. He published sharp critiques of capitalism and environmental degradation. He launched a committee in 1978 aimed to reboot the French Socialist Party. That committee introduced two young protégés of Attali himself to the party elite, Ségolène Royal and François Hollande, future presidential candidates and future president respectively. Long story short, Jacques Attali played a major role, or even led, all the transformations within the Socialist Party that eventually brought François Mitterrand to the presidency in 1981. Mitterrand, who was already seriously ill by the time of his election, made Jacques Attali his right-hand man. Attali was everywhere with him. He represented Mitterrand at the G7 and in the European Council. In fact, it's difficult to find a protocol photo of François Mitterrand where Attali isn't present. Attali was arguably the real head of state. If you wanted a problem solved or a career boost, you looked to meet Jacques Attali. In 1982, he was approached by a young lawyer, whom Attali later described as an extraordinary human animal. Attali swiftly became his mentor. That young lawyer would later become President of the Republic, Nicolas Sarkozy. Despite being the ideological leader of the Socialist Party, Attali was no stranger to powerful business circles, including those operating in the gray zone, let's say. Known for his luxurious lifestyle, he was often referred to as La Gauche Caviar, a champagne socialist. After Mitterrand's presidency, Attali became the first head of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, but in 1993 he had to step down after revelations that he had used the bank funds for personal expenses. He went on to found several NGOs, including one with a mission to fight poverty through microfinance. Over time, it expanded to promote entrepreneurship and support young business talents. That organization is Positive Planet. Many major names in French business were linked to it this or that way, including David de Rothschild. Remember that name. He will play an important role in Macron's rise. At the same time, Attali was engaged in African affairs. He became a paid advisor to the president of Congo and helped organize the sale of decommissioned Soviet weaponry to Angola, along with Mitterrand's son, Jean-Christophe. By the mid-2000s, despite holding no official office, Attali was arguably the most powerful man in France. His influence was so vast that during the 2007 presidential election, both second-round candidates, Nicolas Sarkozy and Ségolène Royal, were in some ways creations of Jacques Attali. So when Sarkozy won the presidency, it was no surprise that Attali was appointed head of the committee charged with launching large-scale economic reforms, the so-called Attali Commission. And it was during that time when Jean-Pierre Jouyet, a former Macron's honeymoon boss, apparently pointed at Attali's next protégé superstar, 30-year-old Emmanuel Macron. As Jacques Attali would later say, Emmanuel Macron, I was the one who spotted him. I even invented him. Keep in mind, this commission was meant to reboot the French economy, to bring France back to prominence. Naturally, many influential executives and businessmen hovered around the commission, hoping for their own opportunities. Among them were three key figures: Karim Tajidine, Éric Labbé, and Guillaume Liéger. All three worked closely with Macron in preparation of the final report. All three were connected to one particular company, McKinsey. I think the oligarchic nature of this committee particularly, and French politics at large, is quite obvious at this point. I would even go so far to say that Jacques Attali brought Emmanuel Macron into this environment to shape him into the ideal avatar for French business elite. In this context, Macron's 2008 appointment in the Rothschild Bank, where David de Rothschild, longtime Attlee's associate, held sway, makes perfect sense, even though Macron had no background in banking or relevant education, and the lack of experience was obvious to his colleagues. He didn't know the basics. Instead, he leaned on charm, networking, and cultivating mentor-mentee relationship with senior staff. One of his former colleagues told Financial Times, I quote, "He was the guy who would constantly say thank you. He didn't know what EBITDA was. He didn't try to hide it, and instead of looking it up in a corporate finance book, he asked around, which was disarming. He crafted an image of a sincere, slightly naive but empathetic figure, someone so harmless you didn't want to criticize him." While lacking in technical skills, Macron focused on what he did best, getting close to power. He befriended François Hollande, the right hand of David de Rothschild. Hollande would later say, "Emmanuel is my child." To the astonishment of his peers, Macron rose super quickly. By 2010, he became a managing partner at Rothschild's. Anyone with corporate experience would tell you that such a meteoric rise in just 2 years is not just unusual, it is impossible. Unless, of course, it was a part of a carefully scripted plan to groom a future pocket president. In 2012, Macron managed the Nestlé acquisition of Pfizer's baby food division. The deal made him a millionaire, but experts doubt he actually negotiated it. Most likely the deal had been prepared by others and Macron was simply placed on top to take credit. Meanwhile, President Nicolas Sarkozy, embroiled in scandal after scandal, lost re-election to François Hollande. Yes, yet another protege of Jacques Attali, who supported him since 1978. Upon taking office, Hollande, apparently under Attali's influence, appointed Macron as the deputy financial secretary, and then guess what happened? Macron became very close to François Hollande. They befriended. He became his protege, his right hand, and even his political son. To put it shortly, Macron became for Hollande what Attali was for François Mitterrand. Whether this bond was sincere or something Hollande had no real choice in remains debatable. While Macron appeared endlessly loyal in public, polite, respectful, and praising Hollande in every way, in private, it was a different story. In May 2014, Macron attended the Bilderberg conference, where he sharply criticized Hollande and his Prime Minister Emmanuel Valls. Shortly after, Macron resigned. This resignation triggered political instability, especially in the cabinet's economic wing. By August 2014, two ministers, Arnaud Montebourg, Economy, and Benoît Hamon, Education, publicly condemned Hollande's austerity policies and accused him of serving German financial interests. On August 25, 2014, the government collapsed. And then, surprise! Macron, this 30-something ex-Rothschild banker with barely any government experience, is appointed Minister of the Economy. You might ask why. Macron just betrayed Hollande. He trashed him in front of the most powerful man at Bilderberg. Why would Hollande agree to this? The answer might be simple, because Hollande had no real choice. He was a figurehead, a placeholder president. By that time, it became obvious that Hollande was just yet another disposable card in Attali's sleeve. A jack of clubs, just like Sarkozy before him. There is definitely one thing I admire about Jacques Attali. He always looks into the future, and Hollande was too bleak. He was a sweaty, repelling mess you couldn't bet on. Macron, by contrast, was polished, articulate, and photogenic. And this is where the real story of the Mozart of the Élysée begins. As Minister of the Economy, Macron didn't leave much of a mark, unless you count the sale of Alstom's energy division to General Electric. But despite this mediocre record, he was everywhere in the media. Unusually so. The Minister of the Economy is a behind-closed-doors guy. Do you even know who holds this office in your country? But Macron Suddenly he was everywhere, he became a household name. The media buzzed about his family, his personal life, his charm, his potential. It was clear that he was being primed for something bigger. And it wasn't just some random media attention. Several major outlets tied to Bernard Arnault and LVMH were permanently promoting Emmanuel Macron everywhere. By summer 2015, even for the dummies from the Socialist Party, it became obvious that Macron is nurtured by the large-scale capital and is expected to serve it back. So he was not invited for the General Assembly of the Socialist Party. Nevertheless, hold your breath. François Hollande didn't alienate from Macron. He still believed that Macron was loyal to him, that he was not going to challenge him in 2017. Spoiler, Hollande was wrong. To Macron's credit, he tried not to antagonize Hollande too much, allowing him to save face for a while. On April 6, 2016, during citizens' gathering in Amiens, Macron publicly launched En Marche. The movement positioned itself as transpartisan and centrist, neither left nor right, and by the time had no specific political goals. But by June 2016, Macron and his longtime associate from McKinsey, Karim Tajuddin, were already organizing secret meetings for Macron's upcoming presidential campaign. Macron kept reassuring Hollande that he wasn't going to betray him. One can only imagine how naive or just out of touch Hollande should have been to believe a word of it. A tremendous amount of effort went into making Macron a more palatable candidate. PR expert Mimi Marchand, known in France for her shady past and sheer ruthlessness, was in charge for whitewashing Macron's image and neutralizing rumors about his marriage and alleged homosexuality. Bernard Arnault funded favorable media coverage and positive polling. On August 30, 2016, Macron resigned from the government. By November 16, he officially announced he was running for the presidency. Rumors suggest that Jacques Attali personally called François Hollande to apologize for bringing Macron at his doorstep. But come on, none of this would have been possible without Attali's direct input. Emmanuel Macron was his last creation, the King of Hearts. Hollande was completely broken. On December 1st, he withdrew from the race, becoming the first sitting president in French history to voluntarily drop seeking re-election. In his announcement that surprised many even among his own party, he looked like a bitten, wet garbage cat. Just look at this absolutely destroyed husk of a man.
Aussi, j'ai décidé de ne pas être candidat à l'élection présidentielle, au renouvellement donc de mon mandat.
So Hollande is in a litter box, yet still, Macron had no real political program, like none, nada. The first round of elections was set for April 2017, and even the most charitable polls in November gave Macron only 10% support. He wasn't a serious contender. At least not yet. Anyone following French politics at the time could see the landscape. Hollande was unelectable. Le Pen was too radical and drowning in scandals. And the name that kept coming up was François Fillon. After winning the 2016 primary of the right and center, Fillon was widely seen as the candidate most likely to win the presidency. He defeated Juppé and Sarkozy and was expected to unify conservative voters. But then, in January 2017, Le Canard Enchaîné revealed that Fillon's wife, Penelope, had received more than 600,000 euros of public funds for the job she allegedly never actually performed. The accusations quickly expanded to include payments to their children and accusations of embezzlement and fraud. The moment I heard about it, I recognized the playbook. It was déjà vu. The thing is, in 2012, both of Attali's minions, Sarkozy and Hollande, should have had a much stronger opponent for the presidential race, a man outside of Attali and Socialist Party box. Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Back in 2011, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, then managing director of the IMF and the presumed frontrunner for the 2012 election, was arrested in New York for allegedly assaulting a hotel housekeeper. The charges were later dropped, but Strauss-Kahn's political career was finished, clearing the way for Hollande and Sarkozy. The Fillon affair was the same tactic. Unfortunately, Fillon, stubborn as a mule, didn't step aside immediately. He didn't yield to Juppé or Sarkozy, effectively ensuring that the second-round matchup would be Macron versus Le Pen. At this point, Macron's victory was all but guaranteed, and on May 7th, 2017, with 66.1% of the vote, Macron would become Emperor of Europe, President of France. His first move as a president, appointment of Édouard Philippe as the prime minister. Yet another man tied to Jacques Attali. I must admit something. I liked Emmanuel Macron. He was young, charismatic, and very different from this old, crusty, sweaty, revolting elite. Even after writing all this, I still have a strange sympathy for him. Maybe because my first romantic relationship was with my university professor, and she was 21 years older than me. Maybe I somehow relate to his personal story. I don't know. But was his presidency any good for France? No, it's been marked by social unrest, historic inflation, diminishing influence of France throughout the world, especially in Africa, and permanent prosecutions of his critics and political opponents. He appears petty and mean when he sues journalists like Natasha Ray and Amandine Roy for spreading rumors about Brigitte Macron's alleged identity. Personally, I don't believe this shit, but come on, dude. You're the president. Now he's suing Candace Owens for defamation. I'm no fan of Owens, but that's pathetic. And it's made worse by Macron's secrecy. He demands privacy as if he were a bank clerk, not a head of state. People want transparency, especially when it comes to a leader's family. That's not invasive, it's necessary. If your sister, let's say a painter, sells a painting to a businessman for 10 million euros, we want to know. That's public interest. But with Macron, if you ask too many questions, lawyer will show up at your doorstep. Look at his latest blow-up with Marine Le Pen. On March 31st, 2025, she was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison and banned from public office for 5 years over alleged embezzlement of EU funds, a very familiar tactic of using the judiciary to neutralize political rivals. Now he's using Vladimir Putin to feed the external enemy narrative, threatens people with myriads of Russians conquering Europe back on 50 million tanks. Pretty primitive scarecrow to use, to be honest. Recently, Macron let something slip. The French constitution prohibits serving more than 2 presidential terms in a row, meaning that he could sit one term out and then come back. Sounds familiar? With time, Macron actually starts to resemble Vladimir Putin, a man handpicked by oligarchs to protect their interests, who then became powerful enough to reshape the system. A leader who decides how far to push the constitution, how to crush dissent, how to punish enemies. Mark my words, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the French constitution amended to accommodate Macron's ambitions. Hell, I wouldn't even be shocked to see some sort of ridiculous special military operation to demilitarize Belgium. Because at the end of the day, guess what? I have no idea who the hell Emmanuel Macron is. Okay, let's treat this as the end of season 1 of the Northern Philosopher Show. I will come back with something different, something timeless. I'm the Northern Philosopher. Farewell.